You are live.
Welcome everyone to Senate Education. This is Thursday, April 4th, 2:10. Apologies for the delay. We have been on the floor and we have with us, Mary, how do I pronounce your last name?
Papazian, how are you? No problem, by
Papazian.
the way.
It's great to have you. We really appreciate it. And sincere apologies for the tardiness.
No, it's all good. Not a problem at all. Gave me a chance to have a little lunch. I don't know if you have.
Yes, we're good. We're good. Thank you very much. So we asked you to come here to talk to us about higher education board composition. We have a bill before us, and frankly, we've had this kind of bill for a number of years around putting faculty and staff on university and college boards. In some ways, it seems like some institutions across the country are moving in this direction, others are not. We also realize the incredible complexity of boards around the country. I remember several years ago when we were looking at this issue, one thing stood out. One institution, Cornell, has to have a descendant of the founder on the board. So all sorts of models out there. And the request to kind of dig into this specifically came from Senator Weeks from Rutland, but I know the entire committee is interested in hearing from you. So with that, we welcome your thoughts.
Well, terrific, and it's great to be here. So thank you. I know we submitted the some testimony in writing, but I'm going to read through it if that's okay with you.
Absolutely.
I think it'll address some of the questions, and then I've got time, and you've got time, and happy to take any questions you might have. So let me just jump right on in. On behalf of the Association of Governing Boards of Universities and Colleges, thank you for inviting me here to testify and answer questions relating to governing board composition. My name is Dr. Mary Papazian, if you've heard, and I'm the Executive Vice President of the Association of Governing Boards of Universities and Colleges. And I'm here today to share AGB's perspective on an issue that many college and university governing boards have discussed for decades, in fact, the addition of voting board seats really dedicated to faculty and or staff. And I understand that this is a issue that you've asked to look at, and so I'm glad to share AGB's perspective. AGB was established in 1921, we're over 100 years old, with a mission to advance higher education as a public good by preparing college, university, and institutionally related foundation governing boards to fulfill their fiduciary duties and exemplify the highest degrees and ideals of trusteeship. AGB provides leading practices, educational resources, and expert support that advance board excellence for its 40,000 or so individual trustee members from almost 2,000 institutions, systems, and foundations, including Vermont State Colleges and the University of Vermont. Now, I myself have served as president of 2 public universities in Connecticut and California, and I currently serve on the board of Higazian University, which is a small private liberal arts college in Beirut, Lebanon. I have more than 35 years of experience in higher education, and in that time, I've worked alongside some outstanding faculty board members. I also served as a provost, a dean, and I was a member of the full-time tenured faculty at Oakland University in Michigan for 16 years. And if you're a March Madness fan, yes, it's that Oakland University that almost beat North Carolina State and might have made its way to the Final Four if they had. As I mentioned, the question of including faculty and staff on governing boards has a long history. There's a saying among my AGB colleagues that when you've seen one board, you've seen one board. Each makes its decisions in a specific context that may be different from that of other boards. So my comments will focus on best practices in good governance, and I'll leave it to you to determine how best to align these best practices with the needs of Vermont citizens. Concern that faculty and staff perspectives might not reach the board, calls for faculty or staff representation on the board typically are intended to strengthen their voice. We find that this worry is especially true when colleges and universities are consolidating or shrinking. However, in AGB's collective experience, adding voting board members to accomplish that goal could significantly undermine effective governance. As a best practice, we recommend that governing boards avoid having designated voting slots for faculty or staff. Citizen trusteeship, the basis for American higher education governance, works best when board members are independent in their individual and collective judgment. Their primary fiduciary duties are to the institutions they hold in trust for current and future generations, not for specific groups or for special interests, but for everyone. To do so, board members uphold the fiduciary duties of care, loyalty, and obedience. Now, as indicated in AGB's 2010 Statement on Board Responsibility for Institutional Governance, it is AGB's view that faculty and staff ordinarily should not serve as voting members of their own institution's governing boards because such involvement runs counter to the principle of independence of judgment required of board members. Particularly in the case of faculty or staff members, board membership can place them in conflict with their employment status. In particular, the duty of loyalty obligates board members to act in good faith and to put the interests of the institution above personal or private interests. And yet, faculty and staff face a real, incontrovertible conflict. Sometimes board members must make difficult decisions that impact themselves and their employees. Boards routinely review budgets, personnel policies, and strategies that could directly impact salaries and employment opportunities. But faculty and staff who serve in a dual role as fiduciaries and employees will always face skepticism that they will act in the best interest of the college system and not for themselves. This is particularly important when considering board membership for faculty or staff who belong to a union. It can be difficult for union members to separate the long-term needs of the institution from the immediate concerns of fellow union members, especially when there is a conversation around salaries, benefits, tenure policies, or the fate of academic programs. Imagine being the faculty member representative preparing for a board meeting the next day. You hear that one colleague with whom you have taught a course is concerned about whether his academic program will be on the chopping block. You hear from your academic chair that there is fear in the department about tenure changes, which are especially painful because you yourself hold a tenured position. By the time you have finished teaching your classes, there are 30 voicemails from people you work with regularly asking for your help. And that is why board independence is so crucial. Having one foot in the institution and one foot outside is a feature, not a bug. Board members' fiduciary duties require them to put their institutions first, not their colleagues. This is not to impugn any specific faculty member who might be able to rise to the challenge of serving as both a fiduciary and a board member, but we invite an inherent conflict of interest when we put someone in that position. In our view, there is no reason to introduce this kind of conflict. Proponents of adding faculty and staff voting board positions sometimes assert that these board members can simply recuse themselves from votes that might directly impact them. Perhaps, but that requires that the board member, one, chooses to recuse themselves, and two, continues to put themselves in the position of making decisions at odds with the desires or expectations of their faculty and staff colleagues. Given the inherent conflict of interest, adding a seat and asking the faculty and staff board members to recuse themselves may not be the best vehicle to ensure faculty and staff input into the board's work. And furthermore, faculty board membership is outside the mainstream of standard board composition. According to AGB's benchmark survey report, Policies, Practices, and Composition of Governing and Foundation Boards, which we did in 2021, only 18.4% of public institution boards have voting faculty board membership, and even fewer, 8.7%, have voting staff board membership. Of that number, only a handful are public college or university systems, as opposed to individual institutions. Now, additionally, the AGB Statement on Board Responsibility for Institutional Governance also states, Even when constituent groups are represented on the board should be mindful that the presence of one or more students, faculty, or staff as members of the board or its committees or institutional task forces neither constitutes nor substitutes for communication and consultation with these constituent groups. As we all know, higher education currently is facing some very strong headwinds, and I've spoken to many of my higher education colleagues about the fear, anxiety, frustrations, and friction in campus communities across the country. I recognize that faculty or staff believe that having a seat at the table will address some of those concerns. But to do so could undermine the board's ability to uphold its fiduciary duties. Certainly, it can create tension. At the same time, it is important that faculty and staff voices be heard, particularly when boards are considering these difficult decisions. In our view, rather than guarantee board seats that carry an inherent conflict of interest, AGB recommends alternative ways to engage faculty and staff. Now, one alternative is the use of designated representatives who regularly update the board on faculty and staff issues and perspectives. It is common practice for these groups to serve or support board committees, both standing and ad hoc. And I understand that the Vermont State Colleges system already includes faculty and staff in one of its board committees and is interested in adding faculty and staff to other committees so the board can hear their perspectives on a range of issues. These opportunities allow for regular back and forth, but do not run the same governance risks at board membership. And this makes sense to us as a good strategy. AGB also recommends that governing boards review their shared governance policies. Although governing boards retain and must retain final authority over their institutions, they regularly delegate certain responsibilities to faculty and administrators so that institutions can effectively marry responsibility, expertise, and accountability. That isn't to say that faculty should expect the last word in an effective shared governance paradigm, but it does allow for a range of voices to come together to find joint purpose and alignment on the best path forward for the institution. In my opinion, based on over 35 years serving in higher education and consistent with AGB's principles of governance independence, I see no sound reason to enact any provision granting voting board membership to faculty or staff. Doing so could have unintended consequences for the Vermont State Colleges system and to Vermont's higher education goals. And as both a former faculty member and campus administrator, I also support and encourage any other efforts short of board membership to ensure the board has the benefit of the perspectives and input of faculty and staff as they do their important work of leadership and oversight of the institution. Thank you, and I look forward to any questions that you have.
Thank you very much. Question, Senator Sheep, please.
Thank you for testifying. It's an interesting perspective, and I appreciate it. I was wondering if there are, just to get an idea of potential unintended consequences, are there examples or instances you can provide for us to think about where faculty or staff have been put on a board and problems have resulted?
Well, I can't give you the specific example because there aren't many examples of faculty on boards. It's still only about 18%. But I can give you examples of programs being cut, for example. If you were, say, at West Virginia and they were proposing the cutting of some major programs, and we know there was great discussion in the campus governance systems, and most universities will have a campus governance system with an academic senate or a faculty senate. But those discussions within the boardroom then become a example of the faculty member defending the faculty position that's already been expressed, which may not be what is in the best interests of the institution. And that is for the boards itself to determine based on the needs for sustainability and long-term good structure. So it's I have seen, for example, with students on boards, that's more common. That actually there's I would say about 45% of boards have student representatives. I've never once seen a student representative vote in favor, for example, of a tuition increase. even though many institutions ultimately go in that direction because of cost. So, you know, it's faculty who serve on boards tend to represent their constituents as constituent members, as opposed to stepping outside of that role to be actual fiduciaries. And that's really the critical difference.
Thank you.
Other questions? Yes, Senator Winters, please.
So, thank you for your testimony, but very, very interesting, clarifying. Question is, if a faculty and staff selected a representative that wasn't associated with the higher institution, would you think that it would be okay for them to have a vote in the board proceedings?
You mean, let me to understand it, you mean in terms of the process of appointment?
Yeah.
You know, I haven't seen that with faculty and staff. I've seen that with alumni. That's the best example I can give, where alum has been selected by an alumni association to serve, which is separate from the, you know, going through the appointing process through the governor's office and the legislature. So there is a little bit of a difference there. The question is that person a member of the faculty employed by the institution? That's where the conflict really comes in. So if they're not employed by the institution, I don't see the same inherent conflict. I think that's the real key. The other thing I would say, there is also tends to be a difference in the a tenure of a governmental appointed position, which might be 6 years or 8 years, depending on the institution, where there are faculty or students or even alum. Those appointments are usually 1 to 2 year, 1 year with a renewal of 2. So they never gain the same kind of institutional sort of knowledge on the board. So there's always an inherent difference between those kinds of appointments and a regular appointment to the board.
Yeah, please.
If I may,
Yeah.
one follow-up question. In the case of Vermont State University, majority of the board members are legislators.
Mhm.
Is there any conflict with that?
Well, you know, that's an interesting one. I mean, I was aware of that. I did look at that. I don't think there's inherently a conflict, but because they can be fiduciaries. I think the key is, can they be independent? And not be, this is always a question with an appointed board going through in the public institutions. They are usually somehow connected to the governor or the legislature, even if they're not necessarily serving as the legislature. I think it's best practice to have more of a mix of outsiders who, you know, who are identified as people who can uphold the values of the institution, and might not be legislators themselves, but are you know, members of the community. Perhaps identified through an appointment process and confirmed through the legislation. I've seen that happen quite a bit. And that strikes me as a bit more of it creates more space of independence than having, what you don't want is your board members as fiduciaries to be the voice of the legislature itself. I think that's always a bit of a challenge as well.
Thank you very much.
Senator, did you have your hand up?
I did not.
Okay, Senator, please.
Thank you so much for your testimony. This is, I guess, more of a comment than a question, but I'll use being on a school board as an example. If we're talking about adverse consequences and maybe not having the best interest of an institution at heart, you know, I think that's tricky. And I'll point to the fact that, for example, on a school board, even if you have a parent on that board, a member of the community, that parent, from my experience, really has the best interest of his or her child at heart, rather than the totality of the institution. And I would say the same about, let's say, a retiree who's on the board. He or she may be concerned about his or her property taxes versus the health of the institution. So I think it's hard as human beings, just generally, to keep our own kind of self-interest out of any of the work that we do. And so I hear what you're saying, and I know you were mainly focusing on fiduciary aspect, but I don't know. I think it's really tricky to sort of split those hairs.
Yeah, I think it's, look, individuals are always capable of rising up and making those separate decisions. And some are not. I mean, that's kind of human nature to some degree. We spend a lot of time with boards really helping them understand their fiduciary responsibilities and how to bring an independent judgment. That doesn't mean that life experiences aren't going to inform those judgments. They clearly are. They help us shape us and how we interact with the world in all kinds of ways. But if you're an employee, let's say, and you're then making decisions about reducing the workforce, and you might be the person being reduced because maybe it's coming out of your department. I come out of the humanities, so I'm particularly sensitive as I'm an English professor by background. And I've seen this happen in department after department where the humanities departments are shrinking because they're not seen as producing the same ROI. We can argue that differently. I don't actually think they don't, but that's a totally different conversation. And so the board says we really need to cut these programs. And by the way, board member, it's your program or it's your closest friends program. I do think there's an inherent conflict there. And I think that's a little different. You're right. You hope these things are good when things are good and it's not a problem. The challenge is if there are, and, we would generally recommend if you're going to make a change, if any group is going to make a change in the composition of the board, it's better to do it when things are going well, because then there isn't that inherent sort of, if you will, defensiveness of protecting when things are going bad. And at the same time, it's really important to create opportunities for input and communication. I mean, that's the other side of it. You want to be as transparent in the process as possible.
Yeah, please.
Quick follow-up, isn't there a process by which a board member could recuse him or herself in the event of a conflict?
Well, there's always that process, no question about it. And it's just a question of who makes the decision on recusal. That's certainly been in the news lately about the court system in America. Doesn't matter what side of the aisle you're on, there's this whole discussion who decides who recuses and is that satisfactory. So it's introducing another layer, that could be complex. And then it's defeating the purpose of having that person on the board in the first place, right? Because then they're not there to vote.
Right.
Yeah, excellent.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Really appreciate you being with us this afternoon. And again, apologies for the delay.
Oh, my pleasure. And, best of luck to all of you.
Thank you.
You've got a big job ahead of you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Mr. Fannin, do you mind joining us? Sure. I know, it's one of those things.
Okay.
Forget. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Hope everybody is safe. Has power, Wi-Fi, fun stuff at home. For the record, Jeff Van, Vermont NEA. Thank you for having me here to discuss with you H871. In large measure, I served on the school construction task force. So it was an enjoyable moment, time. But anyway, so this bill largely covers a lot of that waterfront and does a nice job of capturing that. The only addition I think here that I have of any substance is the working group, the legislative school construction work group on page 11. It lists some entities that the working group shall interact with and consult with. And it's missing, but I think is a key component here, which is the educated voice. People who actually live in a building day in, day out. A friend of mine's a planner, and he was talking about planning a prison. It took him 7 years to plan the prison. And he was working with, he was a young planner, and he was working with a more seasoned planner. who said, don't worry about all this. You'll be working on this project for 7 years, but the people inside will be in there for life and trying to figure out how to get out. So we'll make something and it'll be botched in some way. And don't worry about that. Do the best you can through the information you have right now. I'm not suggesting this is that. It's comparable, but we are talking about a building that teachers, support staff, bus drivers, cafeteria workers will be working for years and years and years. And it would be good to have their voice. So, for example, when we have our fall district meetings around the state, I sat next to a gentleman who, I think it was in Woodstock. They're doing a big bond, I don't even know if it passed or, kind of like it did. But the architects met with the school staff, I think he said 3 or 4 times. And one of the suggestions the school staff made was, you have the cafeteria, excuse me, the school guidance office dumping out right into the cafeteria. Well, we're often dealing with kids who are in crisis, in a difficult moment, and may come out of our office not looking their very best. And you're sending them right into a cafeteria situation, which might not be good. And all they did was make some simple changes to how the guidance office was exited or something, I guess. I don't know all the details. But the teachers really appreciated that they actually thought of where is this kid going to go leaving the guidance office, and how are they going to be met by their peers? And if it's dumping right into a cafeteria, they might not want to interact right away with peers. And so it's those little things that make a school function and function well for students, for staff, and others who interact with the building. So my only suggestion would be to ask the working group to consult with us, and we'll appoint a teacher or something, I guess, because it lists all the entities, school boards, superintendents. I think we should have a voice in it too.
Thanks for that input. That's really great. Do you know if that omission was by design or?
I don't know. I missed it in the first round. I
Yeah,
apologize. I should have caught it over in the house, and I'm there are 2 teachers, at least 3, on that house ed committee, and I'm sure they would
Yeah, I'm
consider
curious
it. I missed
why.
it. So it's on me, and I'm here to say it's a modest ask,
Yeah,
but it seems to us to make a lot of sense.
okay. We can ask some of the house members too, of why they brought that up.
Right. I wanted to engage with Representative Conlon yesterday. He was everybody's trying to get out of here for a little while, myself included.
Okay.
So that's it. That's my only suggestions to Phil. We think it should pass. Thank you.
Thanks.
I'm starting again.
Yes.
NEA representation.
Just, for the worker, to summarize, we think it's good to have an educated voice for the working group, legislative working group to consult with not just school boards and superintendents, but an educator, somebody who works in the building day in, day out for years and years and years.
And Colin's testimony was great yesterday and very helpful.
On BOCES,
Very helpful.
yes. Yeah, he's pretty good.
Yeah, he knows the stuff.
Yeah.
At least on that issue. That's very good. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Drive safely.
Thanks, you too. Sorry to keep you
You're fine.
building.
All good. Got a cup of coffee. It was not happening at all.
Mr. Nichols.
Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Great. So for the record, Jay Nichols, Executive Director of the Vermont Principals Association. I'm just going to start off where Jeff left off, and then I'll share a few thoughts with you. So we're not named in that group either. And I was okay with that. And the reason being is this is about the master plan facility. So this is the state level type stuff. So principals and teachers, when a school decides to do a project, are going to be very involved in that, and they should be. But for the master plan about how the funding is going to work and all those things, I don't think it necessarily needs to have members of our associations there. So that's the reason why I haven't said anything about that same thing that Jeff just brought up. And we can talk about that more if you'd like to. So we fully support the bill. We realize that health education spent a lot of time on it, worked hard to get a lot of the details right. As you know, it's been quite a while, since 2007, since we've had funding for school construction. And as a result, at least one prominent national study I read showed that Vermont was the second worst in the nation in terms of the quality of our facilities. I don't know who the worst was. I can't remember. It was a few months ago when I read that. Our school construction aid task force representative was Chris Young, who's the principal at North Country Union High School, who, as you know, has been dealing with a lot of PCB type issues there. And they're one of the bigger high schools in the state and the only real big high school in that area. He would be glad to come in and testify at some point if you folks would like him to. We fully support the intent behind the bill. Obviously, we're waiting for the delivery of the findings in the form of proposed recommendations, and then I'm sure we'll have some testimony on that. And just a couple of points we want to hit on that we think are relevant. As I mentioned yesterday, the working group, we were talking about BOCES, the working group here is going to have a difficult task, and they're going to have to make some tough decisions as to what their recommendations are. And then those recommendations are going to come to the General Assembly, and you folks are going to have to make some tough decisions. It seems from the conversations that I heard in House Ed that all the experts have testified have been clear that spending money on buildings that have lost their usefulness is not good policy. So when buildings are at a certain point, we reach the point of diminishing returns. In those cases, we're probably better off going new and also looking to see if there's appropriate consolidation that can happen. And I think that's especially true at the middle and high school level. Also in this process, we need to take care of any buildings that have PCBs or other environmental hazards. I know that's mentioned in the bill. We want to make sure that all of our students are in safe buildings, and we need to recognize that local taxpayers may not have the capacity to make the necessary changes without appropriate level of state financial and technical assistance. I want to say that I love the intent language that focuses on setting clear parameters for the Agency of Education and making clear the intent of the work of the working group is really spelled out. Representative Conlon spoke to that yesterday, and you folks asked some good questions around that. So keeping that intent strong is important. We also like the ongoing payment plan concept, using Vermont's bond capacity to leverage funds and for the state to pay a percentage annually. Seems like a reasonable solution. That's my understanding of how the great work Rhode Island's done on fixing so many of their school buildings over the last few years. That's how they've been able to do that. We need to start where we are, prioritize, and start moving forward. And it may take us, a couple decades before we get all the way there. And then finally, and I'm just going to read from my notes here so I say this correctly. All Vermont children are all Vermont children. We should not look at our children as children of a certain community, but rather as a child of the community we call Vermont. So we have a statewide funding system in large part because our Constitution calls for educating of all of our children in an equitable manner, and we tried to do that financially. As we look at the school system's physical infrastructure, we should look at building infrastructure as a critical component of a high-quality education in today's world. And as a state, we should take collective responsibility for this work. Now, yesterday, Senator Weeks made a comment about 21st century, and I can give you some stuff on that. But basically what we're talking about, Senator Weeks, is students that can communicate, that are critical thinkers, that are problem solvers, that are just not kids who necessarily remember something by rote memorization and can throw it back up on an exam, but actually can work well with others, and then have skills like showing up to work on time, being responsible team members, working well with others. Those are what employers are telling us over and over again that they want to see, whether it's from college graduates or kids moving from high school into technical center programs or certificate programs, or going straight into the job force, including the military. We hear over and over again, we want problem solvers, self-initiative, people that can work well with others. And those are the 21st century skills that we are mostly talking about in education.
Mr. Nichols, how does that differ from 20th century skills?
Well, in the model of the 21st century was more of an 20th century is more of an industrial model. And so we were creating kids for jobs that already existed that we knew. How can you be a good assembly line worker? And it was very common for people to only have one or two functions that they had to do. That workforce is completely gone now. Even in the major car manufacturers, you don't sit there and take the fender and put it in this spot over and over again. Instead, you're helping problem solve, you're working in teams, and you're collaborating. So interpersonal intelligence is a much higher need in almost all jobs today than it was, 30 or 40 years ago, as are technical skills. So schools have to try to provide both of those. And yesterday, you folks talked about in the BOCES bill, and I know we need a better name for that, talked about ongoing training of people. That's true in the workforce now more so than it ever was before. companies that used to hire people that would sell trucks and stuff now are sending them to trainings to make sure they really understand how the trucks work. And I know because my son sells trucks, sells tractor trailer trucks, and they go to trainings all the time to really have a better understanding of the product and what the product can do. Didn't used to be that way. So it's in every field. I grew up on a family farm. My dad used to go down the major and he would say, this cow's a pretty good milker. I'll give her 2 scoops. This cow is a pain in the butt. She's going to get only 1. And, you know, today there's computers that say, this is how much you should feed this cow because of the amount of milk that she produces for her body weight and those types of things. So it's a much more complex, dynamic workforce, Senator, than it was in the industrial age. And so schools have been slow to move in that direction, and we need to continue to move further in that direction.
Yeah, no, I agree. I was just sort of teasing in a way, because what you described could have been also 20th century, educational goals. And I think what we need to just decide, as a committee, are we gonna pull this apart? I mean, I could see it also becoming messy. In other words, you bring something like that to the floor, and these are the goals that the education committee believes are 21st century goals. Next thing you end up with, 30 amendments plus that, I was out of that. So I just think it's the one area that I've noticed that we just have to have a little conversation about.
For what
Yeah.
it's worth, I would not break it up. I would leave it pretty much alone, let that committee come back with recommendations, and then let policy lead function after
Yeah.
that,
Yeah,
personally. Because I think you're right. I think
I
you
think
need
that's
to
a great
come up with a lot of amendments.
I think that's a great point. Anything else, Mr. Nichols?
No, that's it. Subject to any questions you folks might have.
The only question I have at this point is, and I guess it's for Mr. Fannin as well. My gut seems like it's in pretty good shape. A few little changes here and there. Who else do you think we should hear from
Oh,
that you think would be particularly helpful as we make our way through this?
have you heard from Jill Briggs Campbell yet?
Not yet. So we will
You
have her.
should definitely hear from her. And you should also hear from the person the AOE hired who's been testifying on this. And yesterday I couldn't think of his name, but I came up with it. Now I can't think of it.
Bob Donahue.
Yes. Who's, I don't know him personally, but he's very good. Both
Great.
of them can talk to you about the process, what they learned from Rhode Island and also Massachusetts, and why they've gone down this road. And I think they've done incredible work. The AOE has been phenomenal on those 2 people particularly.
Great. Mr. Fannin, or Commissioner, can you think of particular teachers, principals, anybody that we need to hear from that might need to weigh in on this at, sort of in your sort of professional circles? Or are we gonna be okay, do you think?
From our perspective, you're okay, although Chris Young would be more than willing to talk to you, but he was very involved in the task force.
Chris Young also won an award recently, so shout out to Mr. Young.
For the United States, he's the National Association of Secondary School Principals Advocacy Champion for the whole country.
It's really
We should
great.
be very proud about that. Yeah.
Jeff?
The only thought I have, and Jay, you may have a better idea about this too, but somebody's gone through a recent school construction large project to give you all in the committee here a sense of how that works. And I don't know who that is, Jay.
It could be Burlington.
Could be Burlington. You're right.
But but maybe somebody else, that hasn't been somebody in addition to Burlington.
Yeah, I like the Burlington idea. That's the biggest project that we've had for a while. If Tom Flanagan or somebody from there wanted to talk a little bit about what that process was like, that might be really good. And I think you have a senator there that has some connections there as well.
Right. I know. I mean, I get that from Burlington's perspective. Somebody's been through it and gone.
Yeah.
You're in the middle of it in Burlington. I'm thinking somebody who can look backwards and say,
Oh yeah.
here's what I learned.
There hasn't been a school
I know.
built in like, what, 30
I know.
years?
I think
Springfield DTE, isn't that a
The
relatively new construction?
Mount Anthony Union Middle School might have been the last. Is it possible the last building that went up in 2000?
When New
A long
Ski did
time.
renovation,
Those-
yeah.
Right, so when you ski.
Yeah.
Yeah, Winooski did a great project, and Gene Berthium would be glad to come talk to you. He's our high school principal of the year for this upcoming year. He was there for that whole project, the planning of it, and the actual completion of it, and is now the principal in that building still. So he would be a person you might want to talk to.
Great. Anything else, maybe? Please.
Just a different perspective. So we were looking at, who to add. I'm wondering, just looking at the list, the justification for the Agency of Natural Resources, the Natural Resources Board, and the Department of Agricultural Rural Development. I'm just curious why those organizations are embedded. If we keep this, maybe get a little logic from Representative Conlon.
Yeah,
Just say, okay, look, yep, get it, all
Yeah.
good, and then
yep, happy to have Rep. Conlon back in to talk a little bit about that.
there must have been a reason. And he may have even mentioned it yesterday briefly, but.
I don't know if he did, I don't remember asking about it. So yeah, we can have Representative Conlon back in.
Did we hear from them on the, when we're on the school construction task force?
Here
From who?
from these folks,
Yeah, those groups that Senator Weeks was talking about. I don't.
not Department of Ag or Rural Development, although they did come up because they've got funding available, and that's Winooski got money from them.
Okay.
So that's why they're there, I'm sure of that, no, I don't think we did hear from all of these folks.
I read through it and I was like,
No.
some of these didn't resonate with me. I was trying to think back, did we hear from them on
Mm-mm.
the task force?
Okay, so reaching back to the school construction task force, the bond bank's involvement was quite
Right.
insightful.
Yes.
And that they may be helpful in keeping us kind of fiscally steered, that type of perspective, not just, hey, what do we want to do, but hey, how do we do it?
Mhm.
How do we fund it? It's gonna be huge.
Yeah. Yeah,
You were both on it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And Mr. Banner, you said the NEA isn't on it.
This, the working group, the legislative school aid is supposed to, consult with certain groups.
Yeah.
I understand what Jay is saying, but I do think it's important to have an educated voice.
Yeah.
When,
On the,
on that legislative folks who are trying to figure out how to fund this, not for necessarily saying this is how you should fund it, but here's how this does work in a school setting. And somebody who's working there in the schools for 30 years, why you want this or don't want that.
and then I guess the other thing I would put out there to the committee as well as to our two witnesses. Susanna Davis's group, in terms of bringing a perspective of diversity, and then, we talked about, the disability community. I know Senator Hashim has been working hard with the, deaf and hard of hearing community. Should be thinking,
yeah. DVAS, DVAS, I believe is the acronym.
and that stands for,
I don't want to mess it up. Hold on.
sure.
Deaf Vermont Advocacy Services. Okay.
And I'm not, it would be great to have them testify. I don't know if they're the right ones to be on the committee, but I think some representative of the disability community at large. It would I think it would be really key to have someone.
Rachel Seelig from,
Dale.
no.
No, what is she?
with legal aid.
Legal aid, yes.
Could have Dale on there. Disabilities, aging and independent living.
When I think of that, I think of people over 65, but I could be wrong.
Dale is covered,
Yeah, we covered
yeah.
guardianship.
Everything, okay.
It's. Yeah, at the top of their page, deaf, hard of hearing, deaf plus, deaf disabled, late deafened population. Part of their service.
Okay.
To kind of not put the actual working group into a box. Just say something to the effect of working group shall consult with the following entities. Like some to the effect of not, but not limited to, the following entities. Just give them,
Doesn't it say?
It does say that,
Yeah,
in J,
it does
any
say
other group
that.
they think relevant.
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, and then what we can, I think what we need to figure out as a committee, in addition to the educator on the committee, I think it would be, we just have to decide whether or not we want somebody representing the disability community, the diversity community, or are those being consulted with? That's something we can, members and senators can think about. Yeah, Mr. Bannon.
One last thought is,
Yeah.
of a name is Rob Evans. Rob Evans is, I don't know what his official title is, but he's school safety. He's a consultant
Good.
to the AOE.
Yeah,
And when there was a lot of money to quote unquote harden schools. And it made sense. You'd build a door that was bulletproof and et cetera. But if the wall around it was crumbling.
Yeah.
And so Rob is a former state trooper, comes at it with the lens of looking at physically, how do we make schools safe? And certainly might have some wisdom because he's been steeped in this stuff for years, working with the Secret Service, other federal agencies.
who's he with now, do you know?
He's with Margolis, and Margolis is a consulting firm
Okay,
that has a contract with the AOE to do work on behalf of schools for school safety generally.
would you
Yeah,
mind?
he's an advisor for Margolis Healy, and he's the director of the Vermont School Safety Center.
I'll get you that.
That would be great. And we did talk to the Vermont School Safety Center last year when we were working on the school safety bill. We may have met Rob. And I just didn't recall, but if you wouldn't mind emailing that name to Morgan, that would be terrific. Because I'd love to move this toward the end of next week. I think we're in pretty good shape to do so. We'll be. And I don't see any big conflict with the House. Anybody else that he wants to? Okay. Great. Okay, thank you both. Okay, Morgan, would you mind seeing if Mr. Burns can come a little early? And we'll
I
go,
will check on that.
thanks, we'll go off and then we can